There are some moments that almost every cat owner faced, even if they do not immediately understand why. The bowl is placed down as usual. The routine is familiar. Nothing seems different on the surface. And yet, your cat approaches, stops, and then simply walks away. Not distracted, not startled, just not cared. Feels small, but it does not feel normal. Because when a cat refuses food, it creates a quiet tension in the room that is difficult to describe. Hunger is supposed to be simple. Eat or do not eat. But with cats, it rarely stays that simple. And in this video, you will see why food rejection is not always about appetite, and how it often reflects something deeper in your cat's internal situation. You will understand how environment, emotional consistency, and subtle behavioral patterns influence feeding in ways that are easy to miss. And more importantly, you will start to see why what looks like disinterest may actually be a form of awareness. Hunger is not the only trigger. Humans tend to break down needs into categories. Hunger is physical. Emotion is mental. Environment is external. But for a cat, these limits are not so clearly defined. A cat does not approach food based purely on physical hunger. Instead, the decision to eat is filtered through a broader system of perception that includes safety, predictability, and environmental stability. If one part of that system is off, the appetite can shift without any direct external reason. Therefore, cat may seem healthy, active, and normal, yet still hesitate at the food bowl. It is not that the hunger disappears. It is that the conditions required to act on that hunger are no longer fully aligned. The environment you stop noticing. One of the most overlooked factors in feeding behavior is the environment itself. Over time, humans stop awareing the details of their own space because it becomes familiar. But for a cat, familiarity does not mean irrelevance. A small change in sound, a different object near the feeding area, a subtle shift in routine, even a change in your presence while they eat. All of these can influence whether a cat feels comfortable enough to begin eating. Cats do not simply consume food. They assess the environment before doing so. And if that assessment does not feel stable, hesitation replaces action. The invisible role of your presence. There are moments when a cat refuses food not because of the food itself, but because of you. Not in a negative or emotional way as humans interpret it, but in a behavioral sense. Your movements, your timing, your energy in the moment of feeding can subtly influence how your cat perceives the situation. If your behavior is slightly inconsistent, rushed, distracted, or unusually attentive, the cat may interpret this as a shift in the environment rather than a neutral routine. And when that happens, eating becomes secondary to observation. When refusal is actually delay. Not all food refusal is absolute. Sometimes it is simply delayed engagement. The cat may return later. They may eat when the room becomes quieter. They may approach again once your presence changes. This pattern often goes unnoticed because the initial refusal feels like the main event. But in reality, the delay itself is the behavior worth observing. It shows that the issue is not hunger, but timing and perceived conditions. At this point, there is a question that often divides cat owners, especially in discussions and comment sections. Is a cat refusing food a sign of independence and natural behavior? Or is it a subtle indicator of stress that owners fail to recognize? If you read through comments on videos like this, you will see two very different perspectives. Some people say, cats are just like that. They eat when they want. Others insist that any change in eating behavior should be taken seriously, even if it seems minor. And this disagreement is not just opinion. It reflects how differently people interpret animal behavior. So the question becomes, when your cat walks away from food, do you see personality or do you see a signal? Patterns over moments and the quiet message. The most important shift in understanding comes when you stop looking at single moments and start looking at patterns. One missed meal is not the story. Repeated hesitation, changes in timing, or subtle shifts in routine are where meaning begins to form. Cats communicate through consistency and change. And food behavior is one of the clearest places where those changes appear. Refusing food is rarely dramatic. It does not demand attention. It does not create noise. But that is exactly why it matters. Because in the absence of obvious signals, small behaviors become more meaningful. A pause, a hesitation, a quiet decision not to eat. These are not random. They are part of a system your cat is constantly adjusting. When eating becomes a test of safety, there are moments when a cat approaches food, pauses, and seems to hesitate in a way that feels deliberate, almost as if the act of eating itself requires confirmation. This is not about indecision in the human sense, but about environmental validation. Eating is a vulnerable act for a cat. It lowers awareness, redirects focus, and reduces the ability to respond quickly. Because of this, the decision to eat is often preceded by a quiet evaluation of safety. If something feels slightly uncertain, even if it cannot be clearly identified, the cat may choose to delay rather than proceed. What appears to be refusal is sometimes a form of caution. And that caution is not random. It is part of a system designed to maintain control over when vulnerability is allowed. The memory of previous moments. Cats do not experience feeding as isolated events. Each moment is connected to previous experiences in ways that are not always visible. A single uncomfortable moment near the food bowl, even if it seemed minor at the time, can subtly influence future behavior. It does not need to be dramatic. A sudden noise, an interruption, or even a shift in your behavior during feeding can become part of a memory that the cat carries forward. Over time, these small associations build into a pattern. So when a cat hesitates, it may not be reacting only to the present moment, but to a quiet accumulation of past experiences that shape how the current situation is perceived. The refusal, in this sense, is not about now alone. It is about continuity. When normal does not look consistent, one of the most misleading expectations humans have is that normal behavior should always look consistent. If a cat eats regularly, then any change feels like a problem. But for cats, normal includes variation. Appetite can shift slightly depending on internal state, environmental conditions, and subtle emotional factors that do not always present clearly. This does not mean that every refusal is meaningful in a serious way, but it does mean that inconsistency is not automatically abnormal. The challenge is not to react to a single moment, but to understand the pattern over time. Because sometimes what feels unusual to you is still within the range of normal for the cat. And recognizing that difference is part of truly understanding their behavior. The subtle shift when you become their safe reference. At a certain point, without any clear signal or visible transition, a cat begins to treat your presence not as something they react to, but as something they quietly rely on to interpret the world around them, and this shift is often so subtle that it passes unnoticed by the human entirely. It appears in small, almost unremarkable behaviors, like the way they briefly look toward you before deciding how to respond to a new sound, or how their body remains relaxed in situations that would have once created hesitation, simply because you are there. What changes is not their awareness, but the way that awareness is anchored, as your existence becomes a reference point against which uncertainty is measured and often resolved without any direct interaction. Over time, this creates a kind of silent alignment, where your emotional state, your movements, even your stillness, begin to carry meaning in ways that no command ever could, shaping their perception without effort or intention. And in this quiet adjustment, something deeper forms, not built through repetition or training, but through consistent emotional clarity, until one day, without realizing when it happened, you are no longer just part of their environment, but the place they return to internally whenever the world feels unclear. And what makes this even more remarkable is that this reliance does not demand perfection from you, as dogs are not searching for flawless behavior but for emotional consistency that they can recognize and return to, allowing even your ordinary, everyday presence to become something steady and quietly reassuring in ways you may never fully notice. So the next time your cat walks away from food, it may not be about appetite at all. It may be about something you cannot immediately see, but can begin to understand if you look closely enough. Because feeding is not just a routine. It is one of the clearest moments where your cat reveals how it experiences the world around it. If this perspective changed the way you think about your cat, consider subscribing, because in future episodes we will continue exploring the quiet patterns behind cat behavior that most people overlook, and how these small moments often carry the deepest meaning.